The housekeeper of Ashborne Manor warned Cordelia Wren about the locked door before she had finished unbuttoning her coat. "The third corridor on the east side. The painted door with the brass plate. You walk past it. You do not stop. You do not so much as look at the keyhole." Mrs. Holloway said this without raising her voice, which made Cordelia understand at once that the rule had cost the household something to write. "His Grace locked that room 6 years ago. Whatever curiosity you brought with you from London, leave it on the gravel." Cordelia set her gloves on the housekeeper's desk and tried to look like a young woman who had no curiosity at all. She had brought a great deal of it. She had also brought a small leather trunk, 3 pairs of darned stockings, a copy of Cooper she could not afford to leave behind, and a steady, secret habit of laughing at things she was not supposed to find funny. She was 26, and out of better options. The locked door was not, at the moment, her concern. "Yes, Mrs. Holloway." "You will say yes, ma'am, until I tell you otherwise." "Yes, ma'am." "And you will not lift your eyes when His Grace passes." Mrs. Holloway turned the household ledger so the new entry faced Cordelia. "He prefers the staff invisible." "Then I am well qualified," Cordelia said, before she could stop herself. There was a pause. Mrs. Holloway looked up. Cordelia saw, with relief, the corner of the older woman's mouth move by a fraction of an inch. The kind of half-smile that costs an aging housekeeper her dignity if she allows it any further. "Watch that tongue, Wren." "I have been watching it for 26 years, ma'am." "Then you know how poorly it behaves." Mrs. Holloway closed the ledger. "Coal scuttle, east wing. The footman will show you. And do not, I beg of you, fall asleep tonight imagining what is behind that door. There is nothing back there worth your supper." Cordelia curtsied and went out. The east wing of Ashborne Manor smelled of beeswax and very old rain. October had crept in through the casements. Somewhere a window had been left open, and the corridor carried a coolness that felt less like cold and more like an unspoken question. The footman, a long-faced young man named Briggs, walked her past 3 doors and 2 narrow stairwells. At the 4th turning, he slowed. "That's it," Briggs said quietly. "Don't look." She did not look. She did, however, count her steps as she passed, the way a child counts steps over a grave to make luck cooperate. 11 steps. The door was painted the green of a forest in deep shade, and a small brass plate had been set into the wood at eye level. The plate had been wiped recently. Someone in this house cared enough for that door to keep the brass clean. That, more than anything Mrs. Holloway had said, told Cordelia the room mattered. "It used to be the music room," Briggs said when they were past it. "Before he was the Duke." "Before?" "His Grace was the 2nd son." Briggs lowered his voice further. They were now at the cellar door, and his eyes had the look of a man counting how much trouble a single sentence might cost him. "He was not raised to wear the title. His brother was." "And his brother?" "Lost at sea. 6 years ago this November." "Oh." "Yes." Briggs handed her the coal scuttle. "I would not say more. He hears everything in this house. He is in the library now, and he has not asked for tea, which means he is reading. He is going to walk past you in this corridor in roughly 10 minutes. Do not be in his way." She was, of course, in his way. She had not planned it. The scuttle was heavier than she had estimated, the cellar steps were uneven, and the weight had pulled her shoulder out of the careful posture Mrs. Holloway had arranged. Coming back up, she misjudged the corner. She turned. He was there. The Duke of Ashborne stopped in the corridor 4 paces from her, and Cordelia, against every instruction she had received, looked. He was a tall man, taller than she had pictured, in a coat of midnight wool that had been cut close enough to show the breadth of him. His shoulders were the shoulders of a man who had once taught himself to move ship's rigging, or perhaps had simply spent 6 years lifting things he did not want to lift. His hands were broad and ringless. His face was startling. He was not yet 30, no older than 28, and the bones of his face had the kind of clean, deliberate beauty that made the silence around him feel like an architectural choice rather than a pose. His hair was dark and slightly damp at the temples. He had the eyes of someone who had been awake a long time without admitting it. He did not move. She understood, with embarrassing speed, that she was supposed to flatten herself against the wall and let him pass. She did flatten herself against the wall. She did so with a coal scuttle in her hand, a smut of soot on her cheek, and a curl of hair that had escaped her cap and now was, traitorously, falling across her left eyebrow. She lowered her eyes. He walked past her. He stopped 1 pace beyond her shoulder. "You are new." His voice was lower than she had prepared for. It was also, she noted with a small clinician's part of her mind, gentler than the voice of a man who threw away keys. Not warm, not cruel. Something else. "Yes, Your Grace." "What is your name?" "Cordelia Wren, Your Grace." He did not turn around. "Mind your steps in the east wing, Miss Wren. 2 of the boards near the 4th turning are loose. Mrs. Holloway has been told." "Yes, Your Grace." He walked on. She stood there for nearly a minute after his footsteps had gone. It was not a kindness, exactly, what he had said. It was a warning. He had told her where the floor was unsafe. He had not looked at her once. He had not raised his voice. He had not asked anything of her. And yet she found herself, against all reason and against everything Mrs. Holloway had carefully constructed for her, very glad indeed that she had looked. That night she lay in the narrow attic bed she had been given, listening to the rain begin in the slates, and she thought of the door, the brass plate, the room that used to be a music room, a man who would not let it be swept, and would not let it be opened, and would not let his servants count their steps past it. She thought of his hands at his sides, ringless, empty, wide enough to fill a doorway. She thought of the coal smut on her own cheek, and the way he had not commented on it. She thought, but did not say, that she had not laughed inside her own chest like that in a very long time. The laugh that does not come out of the mouth, the laugh that lives behind the breastbone and announces, against your better judgment, that you are awake again, and that the world has just become more interesting than you intended it to be. Cordelia Wren turned to face the wall. She was a housemaid. She was 26. She had no business being interested in any door at all. She slept badly. The next morning she was assigned the morning trays. It is a fact rarely understood outside of great houses that the morning tray is the most strategic post in any household. The tray-bearer hears who has slept and who has not, who is waiting for letters and who has thrown them into the fire. Mrs. Holloway, in giving her the trays, was either showing trust or laying a trap. Cordelia was prepared for either. The Duke took his coffee in the library at 7. He did not look up when she came in. He was at the long oak desk with the Morning Post laid out in 3 columns, read, unread, refused, a habit she filed away at once. The 3rd column was the largest. He had been refusing letters for a long time. She placed the tray. She turned to leave. "Miss Wren." She turned back. "The fire." She knelt at the grate, set the tinder, struck the flint with hands that did not, she was pleased to discover, tremble. Behind her, she heard him turn a page. The room smelled of old paper, and a soap he must have used himself, rather than letting his valet choose for him. It was the soap of a man who liked plain things. The fire caught. She rose. "There is also," he said, "a letter on the 3rd column that I would like burned without being read." She froze halfway to the door. "Your Grace?" "The blue seal," he said, still not looking up. "On top of the refused stack. Take it. Burn it. Do not bring it back." It was not a request that should have been given to a maid she had been employed for less than a day. It should have been given to his secretary or his butler, or to no one at all. She understood at once that it was a kind of test, although she could not yet tell what was being tested. She crossed to the desk. The letter was on top of the third column. The seal was indeed blue, a cool shade like the sky over winter water. The hand that had addressed it was a woman's. Cordelia took it between her fingers without comment. She returned to the fire. She set the letter on the coals, where the wax began at once to warm and run. She did not let it slide off. She felt his eyes on her back. When the letter was fully alight, she stood up and turned. "Done, Your Grace." His face did not change. He nodded once. "Thank you, Miss Wren." She curtsied. She left. In the corridor, with the door safely shut behind her, she leaned against the wall and let her hands begin to shake. Not at the burning of the letter. She had served 3 previous houses and burned plenty of correspondence. But because the woman's handwriting on that envelope had been the same as the brass plate. Cared for, maintained, recently touched. Whoever had been writing him those blue-sealed letters had not stopped. He had been refusing them, and they had kept arriving. 6 years' worth of refusal had not exhausted whoever was on the other end. And that meant, Cordelia thought, that the locked room and the unread letters belonged to the same story. She was not going to solve it. She was a housemaid. She was 26. She could not afford to lose this position. She nevertheless began, very quietly, to count the columns of his post each morning. It rained for 3 days. The roof of the long library, she discovered, was older than the Duke, and older than the Duke's grandfather. And on the 3rd night, a slow brown stain had appeared above one of the bookcases, like a continent finding itself on the ceiling. Mrs. Holloway, in a fluster, sent Cordelia and Briggs and 2 other footmen up the back stairs with sheets and tin pails to catch what they could, and the Duke himself came up not long after, in his shirt sleeves, and worked beside them. Cordelia had not, until that moment, seen a Duke roll up his sleeves. His forearms were the forearms of a man who had spent years either rowing or fencing, or both. The candle flame from the war sconce caught against his throat, where his cravat had loosened. He worked in silence. He passed her a stack of vellum with the same careful precision with which he passed Briggs a brass pail. He did not, she noted, look at her face, but he did look at her hands, and he adjusted the weight of the next stack accordingly. "Miss Wren," he said quietly at one point, low enough that only she heard. "The green volumes are vellum. They will not survive water. The brown volumes are leather. May survive almost anything." "Yes, Your Grace." "If you must save one, save the green." "Yes, Your Grace." "Your father was a clergyman." She was so startled she nearly dropped the volume. "Yes, Your Grace." "I noticed last night when you tried not to recite Cooper." She did not look up. She could feel her face turning the colour of a saffron silk. "Forgive me, Your Grace." "For knowing Cooper?" For noticing it aloud." "Miss Wren," he said. Not a smile. Something shaped like the place a smile would sit if it had been allowed to live there. "If you cannot recite poetry under your breath at 3 in the morning while saving my library, I do not know what hope there is for any of us." He moved past her with the next stack. She did not breathe properly for a quarter of an hour. By the time the storm slackened, the worst of the books had been carried out, and the library smelled like old paper, wet wool, and the wax of 3 burning candles. The footman had gone for tea. Briggs was downstairs filling the housekeeper in. Mrs. Holloway was, somewhere, threatening a roofer's life. Cordelia and the Duke were alone in the library. She stood by the long window. He stood by the desk. The candle nearest him was guttering. He did not move to trim it. "Thank you, Miss Wren." "It is my work, Your Grace." "It is not. You should have been off duty at 10. He turned the wick of the candle himself with 2 fingers. "You are owed half a day." "Your Grace, take it tomorrow." "Yes, Your Grace." A silence. She had been told, as a girl, that the silence between a duke and a maid was a wall. This silence was not a wall. It was a window. "Miss Wren." "Yes, Your Grace." "What did you think the room was?" She did not need to ask which room. They were both, at this hour, thinking of the same door. "A music room, Your Grace." "Who told you?" "Briggs. I will not have him punished for that." "Thank you, Your Grace." He looked at her for the first time that evening. His eyes were not unkind. They were also not warm. They were the eyes of a man who had decided, 6 years ago, to stop expecting things, and had managed it for so long that the discipline had become a feature of his face. "Miss Wren." "Your Grace." "You will not go inside it." "No, Your Grace." "Even if it is left unlocked." "No, Your Grace." "Thank you." She did not say what she felt, which was that he had given her, for the second time in 2 days, a warning rather than a rebuke. She curtsied. She left him at the desk with the unlit candle. She lay awake until dawn, listening to the rain go. The Honourable Felix Hertford arrived at Ashborne Manor on a Thursday afternoon, under a sun that had decided, entirely on its own, to make October look like a stage set. Cordelia was in the front hall, polishing the brass of the banister, when the carriage drew up. She did not have to be told who it was. The footman opened the door, and the man who stepped out had the Duke's bones about the eyes, and none of the Duke's stillness. He was perhaps a year older than Edmund. He was handsome in the loud way that men who have never been disappointed are handsome. A square jaw, a confident mouth, a cravat tied with the small flourish that belongs to gentlemen who watch themselves in mirrors. He was wearing a riding coat of indigo with silver buttons. He was already speaking before the door had closed behind him. "Tell my cousin," he said, handing his gloves to Briggs without looking at him, "that I have come about the clause." He went into the breakfast room without waiting for invitation. The clause, Cordelia later learned in the servants' hall, was this: Ashborne Manor and the title of Duke had passed to Edmund 6 years ago, when his elder brother Theodore had been lost at sea. The estate, however, was tied to a marriage requirement. If the Duke did not marry by the 7th anniversary of his inheritance, that is, by November of next year, the entail collapsed, and the estate fell to the next agnate male, who was the Honourable Felix Hertford. Felix Hertford had 13 months. He had been counting them for 6 years. "He has been here twice this season already," whispered the undercook, who had a fondness for Cordelia, and a still greater fondness for a captive audience. "He sweeps in, he reminds the Duke of the date, and he sweeps out. He thinks his Grace will sit in this house in his black coat and let the months run out. I think it too, God help me. He has not so much as looked at a woman in 6 years." "Has he not?" Cordelia said, quite carefully. "Not since Lady Mariana." "Lady Mariana," his brothers intended. The undercook crossed herself. "Theodore. They had been promised since they were 16. When the news came, Lady Mariana fell into a sort of mourning that has not really lifted. She lives in the dower house at Whitley with her aunt. He sees her every St. Andrew's Day. He sends a carriage. He has done so for 6 years. He never enters the house." "And the letters?" The undercook stopped. "What letters?" "The blue seals." The undercook's eyes narrowed. "How do you know about those?" "I burned one yesterday." "He had you burn one." A long pause. "Then he is starting to refuse her even on paper. He used to read them and not answer. Now he will not even read." The undercook reached for a fresh egg with hands that had lost their idle quality. "Miss Wren, you are a sensible girl. Burn what he tells you to burn. Do not ask whose hand wrote it. There is nothing in this house worth your knowing. It was the second time in a week she had been told that. She was beginning to mistrust the advice. The morning of her half-day was bright and very cold. She walked the 4 miles into the village of Ashborne and back, on the theory that exercise would silence the part of her mind that kept counting brass plates. It did not. She returned to the manor at 2 in the afternoon and climbed the back stairs. She turned at the 3rd corridor. She passed the door, she did not look, and continued to the linen press. At the linen press, she stopped. Someone had left the brass key in the lock of the locked door. It was not an oversight. Maids who left keys did not stay maids. Briggs would not have done it. Mrs. Holloway certainly would not have done it. Which meant, she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, someone in this house had wanted that key in that lock today. Her half-day. The day the Duke had told her, with his own mouth, to take. She stood in the corridor for one slow breath. Then she did, against every instruction Mrs. Holloway had given her, the unreasonable thing. She turned the key. The door swung inward without a sound. The hinges had been oiled within the year. She stepped inside and shut it behind her, because it occurred to her that whatever this room contained, it would not become less private for her standing in the corridor with it open. The room had been a music room. A pianoforte was at the far end, sheeted in dust covers gone silver with age. There was a window seat in saffron damask, faded by sun. There was a small writing desk of inlaid satinwood. There was a bookcase. There was a low fire grate, which had not been laid for 6 years. The room smelled of lavender. Someone, regularly, replaced the linen sachets. Maintained. Recently touched. There was, on the wall above the pianoforte, a portrait. Cordelia walked towards it slowly, because her knees did not entirely belong to her any longer. The portrait was 3/4 life-size. It was framed in gilt. It had been painted, the small brass plate informed her at the bottom, in 1814. The man in it was 22. He was sitting on a stone bench in a garden full of late summer roses. He was wearing a coat of saffron yellow, unbuttoned at the throat, and his cravat had been tied with the carelessness of a man who knows he will be told off and intends to enjoy it. His hair was the same dark hair she now knew. The shape of his hands on his knees was the same shape she had watched fold a piece of vellum yesterday. The bones of his face were the same bones. There was no mistaking him. But he was laughing. Not a polite laugh, not a salon laugh. A wide, helpless, undignified laugh. The kind a young man gives when his elder brother has said something to make him forget he is supposed to sit still for the painter. His eyes were bright. His shoulders were thrown back. There was a small spaniel asleep across his boots. Its ear had been painted in such loving detail that Cordelia could see the silver hairs at the tip. The man in the portrait was Edmund. The man in the portrait was alive in a way the man downstairs was not. She had to put a hand against the pianoforte to remain standing. She did not weep, because she had not earned the right to weep over this man. But the thing behind her breastbone, the laugh that lives behind the breastbone, that thing she had felt the first night and tried to dismiss, pressed forward without permission. There was a footstep in the corridor. She did not have time to retreat. She turned. The door opened. The Duke stood there. He saw her. He saw the portrait. He saw, in a single sweep, that she had not yet found the composure to lie about it. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Cordelia found her voice first, because she knew, very practically, that he was not going to. "Your Grace, the key was in the lock." "I know." "You—" "I left it." His voice was very low. "Mrs. Holloway sets out the keys for the laundry corridor on the housekeeper's hook on the half-day. I removed one and placed it in this lock at noon." "Why?" He did not answer. "Your Grace, why?" because I had been told there was a maid in this house who counted my morning post. She felt the colour leave her face entirely. Briggs has not betrayed you. Mrs. Holloway has not betrayed you, I noticed without help. He had not moved from the door. You count 3 columns at 7 in the morning. You looked twice at the blue-sealed letter before you put it in the fire. You were unable to keep yourself from glancing at this door when you carried coal past it on your 2nd day. I've been in this house 6 years. I notice when a thing in it changes. I will leave by morning. No. Your Grace, I do not want you to leave, Miss Wren. The room was very quiet. He was not looking at the portrait. He was looking at the floor, a foot to the left of her shoes, and Cordelia understood, with a slow and terrible clarity, that he had never come into this room since the door had been closed. He had not seen the painting in 6 years. He could not bring himself to look at it now. She stepped to one side, between him and the wall. She was, suddenly, between the Duke and the man he used to be. Your Grace, look at me, not at the floor. Miss Wren, look at me. He looked at her. You are not the man in this portrait, she said quietly. I have been in your house 7 days. I know that. The man in this portrait was 22. You are 28. You have buried things he never had to bury. You have kept a dower house standing 4 miles from here because you could not bear to have it sold. You have refused a woman's letters so consistently for 6 years that I burned one of them yesterday. You have done all of that quietly, in a coat of midnight wool, in a house that has forgotten what your laugh sounded like. You are not him. She drew a breath. He had not moved. But you have not done away with him either, Your Grace. He is not what is in this room. What is in this room is a portrait. He is in your shoulders when you carry vellum. He is in your mouth when you tell a maid that Cowper is acceptable at 3 in the morning. He is in the way you noticed I write with my left hand. He has been in this house the whole 6 years. You only locked the door. He was still looking at her. I will close this room behind me when I leave it. I will give you the key. I will not speak of what is in here to a single soul in this house or out of it for as long as I live. I owe you that, Your Grace, for keeping me on a half-day. She swallowed. But I will not pretend I have not seen you. And I will not pretend I think the man in this room is someone you must be ashamed of. He is laughing, Your Grace. He is laughing at his brother. There is no shame in that. He closed his eyes. She had never seen the Duke of Ashborne close his eyes before. It was not a long thing. It was the length of a single in-breath. Then he opened them again, and they were the same eyes as before, except that something, very far down, had moved. Miss Wren? Yes, Your Grace. Lock the door behind us. Bring me the key at the library. Yes, Your Grace. He turned and went out. She stood in the room 1 moment longer. She looked at the portrait. The young man in saffron looked back at her, laughing at a brother who had walked into the surf 6 years ago and never come back. She did not know what to say to him. She nodded at him once, the way one nods at a man who has been sitting too long alone in a room. Then she turned the dust covers over the portrait, locked the door, and walked downstairs. She gave the Duke the key in the library at 5. He took it without looking at her hand. Thank you, Miss Wren. Your Grace. I will see you at the morning trays. Yes, Your Grace. She left him with the key in his palm. It rained again that night. She did not lie awake. She slept like a stone. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of her life. He did not speak of the room, neither did she. He did not lift the dust covers. He did not give her the key back. He did not, however, refuse her. Each morning she set down his coffee and rose from the grate and turned to leave. And each morning he said her name once, quietly, at the door. Miss Wren.
Yes, Your Grace.
Good morning. That was all. It was, she came to understand, an enormous concession. The Duke of Ashborne had not greeted a member of his household in 6 years. She replied, each morning, with the same words.
Good morning, Your Grace.
Then she left him with his post, and his 3 columns, and his fire that she had laid herself. The 3rd column did not grow. He had begun, very quietly, to read. The Honourable Felix Hertford returned on the Thursday of the 3rd week. This time he came with a man Cordelia had never seen, a slight, sandy-haired solicitor in a coat of practical brown, and Cordelia, polishing the banister for the 2nd time that morning, had the unhappy distinction of being in the front hall when both of them swept past her without seeing her at all. "My dear cousin," Felix Hertford was saying as he turned into the breakfast room, "I have brought Mr. Latham with me. Mr. Latham would like a word with you about the entail, about, shall we say, paperwork. There is a small matter of a letter sent 6 years ago." The breakfast room door closed behind them. Cordelia put down her cloth. She knew. She knew the way a housemaid knows everything that happens in a house, by the angle of the dust and the temperature of a hall, that something in that closed room was about to go badly for the Duke. The solicitor had not been brought to discuss the date of November. The solicitor had been brought because Felix had found a paper somewhere that he intended to read aloud. Cordelia thought of the unread letters with the blue seal. She did not entirely know why, but she walked, very steadily, up the back stairs, along the 3rd corridor, past the locked door, to the linen press, and from there down again by the south stairs to the library, where the Duke was alone at his desk. "Your Grace?" He looked up. He saw her face. "Miss Wren?"
"Felix Hertford has brought a solicitor," she said, "and he is in the breakfast room with him now. He intends, I think, to make a claim against the entail. He has spoken about a letter, sent 6 years ago."
She drew breath.
"I think it is one of hers, Your Grace."
He did not move. "Why are you telling me this?"
"Because I have read every letter in the 3rd column."
For one terrible second, she thought he was going to dismiss her without ceremony. He did not. He watched her, with the same long, careful attention with which he watched the Morning Post. "Why?" "Because I had to know whether you were a man worth being silent for." The Duke of Ashborne did not move from the desk. His shoulders did not change. His hands did not lift. But the colour at the base of his throat altered, very slightly, from its usual cream to something warmer. "And what did you decide, Miss Wren?"
"That you were."
"I see."
"They are not what your cousin thinks they are, Your Grace. They are not love letters to you. They are letters from Lady Mariana, asking your forgiveness for surviving him. She does not want your hand. She has never asked for it. She has been writing for 6 years because no one else will tell her she is allowed to remain alive without him."
Cordelia kept her voice steady.
"Your cousin has hold of one, and intends to read it aloud as if it were proof of an arrangement between you. I know the rooms in this house. The breakfast room shares a flue with the housekeeper's parlour. I have 10 minutes, perhaps less, before he begins."
She stopped. "Your Grace, with your permission, I will go to the housekeeper's parlour. I will copy what he reads. I will return to you with the words of the letter and the words your cousin uses to frame them. You will then have, in writing, what is being said about you in your own house. You may decide, with that paper in your hand, whether to walk into the breakfast room or whether to call for him to be removed." He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. Then the Duke of Ashborne said something he had not said to anyone in his household in 6 years. "Yes." She was already at the door. "Miss Wren." She turned. "Thank you." She nodded and went. The housekeeper's parlour was empty at that hour, because Mrs. Holloway was upstairs, supervising the airing of the south bedrooms, and Cordelia let herself in with her own key. The flue,
which connected the breakfast room chimney to the parlour chimney by a quirk of Hampshire stonework her late father, clergyman, amateur architect, would have explained at unbearable length, carried voices upward and outward as cleanly as a speaking tube. She heard Felix Hertford laugh. She heard the solicitor begin to read. She wrote in pencil, fast, on a sheet of housekeeper's paper. The letter, Lady Mariana's letter, was not what Felix wanted it to be, but the parts he had selected, read in the right order, could be made to sound like an arrangement. Cordelia copied each phrase with the care of a woman taught to take dictation in her father's parish. She marked, in the margin, which sentences had been read out of order. At the bottom she wrote, in her own hand, "This letter is dated the November after the loss. It is a letter of grief, not of intention." The phrases the solicitor selected are sentences 4, 7, and 11. Sentence 3, which is omitted, reads, "I do not ask that you take me. I ask only that you do not stop hating the sea." She folded the paper. She let herself out of the parlour. She walked, not too fast, to the library. He was standing at the window. She handed him the paper without speaking. He read it. He read it twice. When he turned, the man at the window was not the man who had stood at that window an hour ago. His shoulders had not changed. His coat had not changed. But behind his eyes, very deep, something which had been folded and put away and kept in the dark for 6 years was, for the first time, beginning to unfold. "Miss Wren." "Yes, Your Grace." "Walk with me to the breakfast room." "Your Grace, I am a maid." "You are the only person in this house, Miss Wren, who has ever read those letters as letters. Walk with me." She walked with him. He did not give her his arm. He could not. She was a maid, and they were in his hall, but he walked at her pace, and he did not slow when she did, and she understood, in the 7 steps it took to cross the hall, that she had become, without intending it, without earning it, in the space of 3 weeks and a single locked door, necessary to him. He opened the breakfast room door himself. "Felix, Mr. Latham." His voice carried the quietness she had come to recognize as the most controlled register of his temper. "I understand you have a letter." "Edmund, read it again, please. From the beginning, all of it." The Duke laid the housekeeper's paper, folded, on the breakfast table, and sat down across from his cousin without sitting in the chair that suggested ease. "Mr. Latham, sentence by sentence, please. Beginning with sentence 1. The solicitor swallowed. Felix's mouth thinned. "Edmund, Sentence 1, Mr. Latham." The solicitor read. He read sentence 2, sentence 3, which Cordelia had marked, sentence 4, sentence 5. By sentence 11, the colour had left Felix Hertford's face entirely. By sentence 15, the closing of the letter, which was a request that Edmund attend his brother's grave on St. Andrew's Day and bring with him a copy of Cooper, of all things, because Theodore had loved it, Felix had stopped meeting his cousin's eyes. "Mr. Latham," Edmund said, very gently, "was that letter, in your professional opinion, a request for marriage?" "No, Your Grace." "Was it a contract of any kind?" "No, Your Grace." "Was it grounds for the breaking of an entail?" "No, Your Grace." "Then I would suggest, Mr. Latham, that you charge my cousin generously for the carriage you both took to my house this morning, and that you accept from him a glass of brandy in the village inn before you go back to London. You will not be welcome here again." The Duke rose. "Felix, get out of my house." "Edmund, get out." Felix went. When the door had closed and the carriage had crunched off down the gravel, the Duke remained standing at the breakfast table for a long moment, with his hand flat on the housekeeper's paper. "Miss Wren." Yes, Your Grace. Sit down. She did not. Your Grace, the staff—
Sit down. She sat. He sat across from her. My brother loved Cooper, he said. Yes, Your Grace. He had a copy of Cooper at sea with him. Yes. He used to read it aloud while I was supposed to be doing my Greek. He rested his hand on the paper she had written. I have not opened a Cooper since the news came. I could not. Last week I heard you reciting one under your breath in my library at 3 a.m, and for the first time in 6 years, I did not stand up and leave the room. He paused. I stayed. I closed my eyes. I listened. You did not know.
No, Your Grace.
Miss Wren, I have not laughed in 6 years.
I know, Your Grace.
I would like, if I am permitted, to begin trying. She did not know what to say to that. She had not been prepared for it. She had been prepared for a great many things. Dismissal, formality, the closing of doors. But not for the Duke of Ashborne to ask in a quiet breakfast room to be allowed to begin trying.
Your Grace.
I am not asking it of you, Miss Wren. Not of you. Not now. You are in this house under my employ, and I will not presume upon that. I am asking it of myself. I am telling you because you walked into my locked room 2 weeks ago, and you said the only sentence anyone has said to me in 6 years that I could not refuse. You said, "He is laughing at his brother." There is no shame in that. He looked at the paper under his hand. I have not been able to say that sentence to myself.
You did not need to, Your Grace. He knew.
The room was very quiet. He did not look up. Will you stay in this house, Miss Wren?
Yes, Your Grace.
Even though I have made it impossible for you to be invisible in it?
Yes, Your Grace.
Thank you. She rose.
Your Grace.
Yes?
I will be at the morning trays at 7.
He looked up. The corners of his mouth moved by a fraction of an inch. The kind of half-smile that costs a duke his composure if he allows it any further. Yes, Miss Wren. She curtsied and went. It was 3 weeks before he sent a carriage to the dower house at Whitley. She knew because she watched him write the letter himself at the long oak desk, the first letter he had written in 6 years that did not concern wheat or roofs or rents. He folded it. He sealed it with a wax he had to soften over the candle himself, because he had not used the seal. He gave it to Briggs. The carriage was sent. Lady Mariana came. She came on a clear afternoon in late November, in a coat of soft grey wool, and she was a small woman, with the quietness of someone who has been trying very hard, for 6 years, not to take up any space in any room. She came with her aunt, who had the good sense to remain in the carriage. She walked into the front hall, where Cordelia, by accident, or perhaps not, was at the banister. Edmund came out to meet her. He bowed. She curtsied. They looked at each other. He said, "Mariana." She said, "Edmund." She put her hand briefly on his sleeve and took it away again, and Cordelia, watching from the banister, understood at once and forever that Lady Mariana had come not as a woman in love, but as a woman who had been waiting 6 years to be released from a debt that had never been hers. The Duke of Ashborne took her hand from his sleeve, very gently, and led her into the breakfast room, and they spoke for an hour with the door shut, and when they came out, both of them looked younger than they had when they had gone in. Lady Mariana left in her carriage. She did not return. Cordelia knew, in the way servants know, that a long 6-year letter had finally been answered. That night she was passing the library when the Duke called her name through the open door. "Miss Wren?"
"Yes, Your Grace."
"Come in." She came in. He was at the long oak desk. The third column of his post was empty. The fire had been lit. He had a copy of Cowper open at his elbow, a bookmark, the same color as the saffron damask of the window seat upstairs,
laid across the page. "Sit down." She sat. "Miss Wren," he said, "I'm 28 years old. I have buried a brother and refused 6 years of letters and locked a room and run an estate alone. Yesterday, for the first time in those 6 years, I read a copy of Cooper aloud, in my own voice, to no one. And the world did not end. I do not deserve today to ask you a question. I am, nevertheless, going to ask you a question. You are entirely free to refuse it. You are also entirely free to laugh at it, which I would prefer to refusal. Your Grace, I am not asking you to be a duchess. I am asking you whether, when the year is out and the entail is no longer my master, you would consent to marry me. Not because I am a duke, not because the estate requires it, because I have spent 6 years in my own house, and I did not begin to wake up in it until the morning a clergyman's daughter from London burned a letter in my library and corrected me, very politely, on the colour of vellum." She looked at him for a long time. "Your Grace." "Yes." "You are aware that I am 26. "Yes." "That my father was a clergyman. That I have 3 darned pairs of stockings. That I have, I believe, soot on my cheek at this very moment from laying your fire." "Yes, Miss Wren." "That I will not be a quiet duchess." "Miss Wren, if I had wanted a quiet duchess, I would not be sitting at this desk." She laughed. It came out of her without permission, a wide, helpless laugh, the kind a young woman gives when a man she has been sleeping badly over for 2 months tells her, in a perfectly composed sentence, that he has been sleeping badly over her for the same 2 months. It was the laugh that lives behind the breastbone. It came up. It came out. He smiled. It was the smile of the man in the portrait. It had not been gone. It had been waiting. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Your Grace." "Edmund." "Yes, Edmund." "On terms, I assume." "On terms." "Name them." She thought for a moment. Outside the window, the November dark was settling into the gravel and the stable yard. A long way off, in the 3rd corridor, the locked room was still locked, and the brass plate was still polished, and the sachet of lavender was still being changed by a hand that, she now suspected, had been his own all along. "My book's in the library," she said. "I will bring perhaps 6. They are not first folios. One of them is the Cooper." "Granted." "That portrait stays where it is." "Where it is upstairs?" "No. It comes downstairs. It hangs in the long hall." He went very still. She watched him work it through. She watched him understand. She watched him take a slow breath and let it out, and reach across the desk and take her hand. The first time the Duke of Ashborne had taken any woman's hand. In 6 years. "Yes," he said. "Granted. And one more thing, Your Grace. Edmund. Edmund. The room upstairs. The music room." "Yes." "You will sit in it with me, on a Sunday afternoon, at least once before the year is out. I will not ask you to laugh. I will not ask you to look at the portrait. I will only ask you to sit in the room, with the dust covers off the pianoforte, with the lavender sachet I changed yesterday, with me." "Granted, Cordelia." She squeezed his hand once and let it go. "Then I will be at the morning trays at 7, Your Grace." "Edmund." "Edmund. Tomorrow." She rose. She curtsied. He rose with her, and he bowed. And there was, at last, in that bow, the shape of the young man in saffron yellow on a stone bench in a garden full of late summer roses. She went up the back stairs. She did not, on her way, count her steps past the locked door. There was no longer any need. The door, she found in passing, had been left ajar. The brass key was in the lock, on the inside. She closed the door very gently. She left the key where it was. The following spring, when the cherry blossoms had come down on the gravel and the south-facing rooms smelled of beeswax and warm stone, the new Duchess of Ashborne sat in the music room with her husband on a Sunday afternoon. The pianoforte had been tuned. The lavender sachet was new. The portrait of the young man in saffron yellow no longer hung above the pianoforte. It had been moved, by Cordelia's request and Edmund's quiet consent, to the long hall downstairs, where it now welcomed every visitor to the house. In its place, above the pianoforte, hung something Cordelia had commissioned in secret from the same painter's studio, 6 months before her wedding, on a London commission paid for out of her wages. A small companion portrait of the late Duke Theodore, taken from a miniature his mother had carried. He was 18 in it. He was laughing at something behind the painter, exactly the way Edmund had laughed at him in 1814. The two brothers hung now in 2 different rooms, looking at each other across a house that had finally let them both stay. Edmund was reading Cooper aloud in the bay window. He read badly. He stumbled on the cadences. He forgot the long S. He laughed at his own mispronunciations. And Cordelia, at his shoulder with a basket of roses she was meant to be arranging, listened the way one listens to a man who has just been allowed his own voice back. Outside, the spring bell rang. She set down the roses. She kissed the top of his head. She walked to the window and looked out at the long drive of Ashborne Manor, where 6 months before, a carriage had brought a small woman in grey to release them all from a debt that had never been theirs to carry. "Edmund?" "Yes, my love?" "Read sentence 3. He did. Outside the window, an English April was at full work in the gardens. Somewhere, behind her breastbone, the laugh that had announced itself the first night she had slept under this roof was still there, still warm, still entirely her own. She turned back into the room. The man at the bay window looked up. He smiled at her, the smile of the man in the portrait, the smile of the man at the desk, the smile of the man who had once, at 3 in the morning, told a maid that Cooper was acceptable in his library. And he held out his hand. She took it. If you have ever stayed in a place longer than you planned because someone in it made you feel, for the first time in years, that the world had become more interesting than you had intended it to be, leave a word in the comments. Tell me what was waiting for you behind the locked door. Subscribe if you would like another fireside hour with us. The kettle is on. The chair across from yours is empty. We will keep it warm.